Welcome back. I hope the first step of the shoe drawing went well and that you have a basic form and details that you're happy with. And remember, this is just an exercise, it's a moment to learn. So if it's not perfect, don't get down on yourself. Your only goal is to grow yourself as an artist. So if this shoe is better than the shoe you drew before it, you've done what you needed to do. Our next step now is to finish the shoe. We're going to finish adding minor details and play with the line quality of the shoe. So what is line quality? Line quality is the variation in the texture of the line. It's what we would use to describe the line. So is the line thin and smooth or thick and rough? Is it dotted? Is it highly varied, meaning it gets thin and then thick and then thin again? What is the quality of the line and how are we going to use that line quality to really make an interesting finished contour line drawing? Let's get into line quality a little bit before we go back to the shoe. There are two parts to line quality, line weight and line texture, and they can both vary. So you can have a line that's got a heavy weight or it's a thick line. You can have a line with a thin weight, or you can have a line that varies between heavy and light. So what I talk with my students about is what varied line weight brings to a drawing. So this is a line without variation. It's all the same thickness throughout the entire path. This word, weight, is built of line with variation within it. It goes from thin to thick to thin to thick to thin. And when you vary line weight in a piece, what you're going to give it is a sense of dimension, volume, value, and weight. It's also more eye-catching. Now, are there times when you want to have line quality that's all the same? For sure. It can be a stylistic choice. It can be what works best for the object. But it's a good thing to play around with varied line weight. And there's a couple different ways you can vary your line weight. You can do what I did here, which is vary your pencil pressure or the pressure of your drawing utensil. So you start light, you slowly increase the pressure, and then you get dark with that hard pressure. You decrease your push. So the harder you push, the darker the line. You can also go in if you want more variation within the line and physically thicken the line up and almost color in sections. And that's how you can get highly varied line. Now, all of my examples here are smooth lines, and that's a textural option, right? So our next thing that we talk about is line texture. So lines over here, all smooth, but there's lots of textures that line can come in. And really what you're trying to do is match the texture of the line to the object that you're drawing. So if I'm gonna draw an egg and I make it with kind of a scattered, sketchy line, my egg's going to look like it's furry. That's probably not the right line to draw an egg with, right? I'm gonna draw an egg, I probably wanna do a smooth and even line. And maybe I'll use a little line weight on the bottom of the egg and thicken that up, make it appear like it has more weight beneath. If I'm gonna draw a tree, I don't want a smooth, perfect line, unless maybe it's a tree that has really smooth bark. I'm gonna draw more of a jagged, rough line to start to indicate the texture of the bark on the tree. So I'm really trying to pick a texture that matches the object that I'm drawing. And then you can include within texture line weight. So here's my fuzzy egg. I could have a darker, heavier fuzziness on the bottom of my egg, which would indicate that that egg, it would give the impression of gravity and weight and value. And I can have lighter lines up here. And I can have sections in my rough tree that get darker and sections that are lighter. So really, when you're thinking about line texture, look at your object, contemplate what's the texture, what's the best line for that object. And remember that lines can be broken. They don't have to be one solid path. And then you want to think about, okay, well, where would I have darker versus lighter lines? What's going to make a more interesting finished piece? Here is my almost finished shoe. And if you look, you can see that I attempted to use some varied line weight. So there's areas where there's thicker line and then it gets thinner, trying to indicate the shoe, pushing this idea of the shoe going in here and coming out, thick to thin to thick to thick to thin. You can see that varying across here, through the toe here. Here where the line disappears is called implied line. You can see the line varying down the lengths of these straps. You can also see varied line texture. On the soles of my shoe, and the sole was a smoother material, I used a fairly smooth, even line. On the back of my shoe, where the canvas of the shoe has worn with age, I used a really broken, varied line, which helps indicate the texture of this kind of frayed fabric. And you can see that same kind of line moving throughout the shoe here. So varied line texture to indicate different materials, and varied line weight to add interest to my drawing and a sense of value and form. Next thing I want to talk about before we look at finishing this drawing, how I got to this point, is I want to talk about the tools that I use in this section. You're going to see me alternate between two different graphite drawing pencils. One is an HB graphite pencil and one is a 4B. 4B is a pretty soft graphite pencil. It's going to draw quite dark. So I used my 4B in areas that I wanted to get darker or heavier. I drew most of the piece with an HB, and I was stuck working with whatever materials I could find at home. I wasn't at school when I did this, and I could not find my 2H graphite pencil. And if I could have, I would have drawn this whole piece with my 2H graphite. So if you're working at home and you have the ability, use your 2H to do the majority of your line work. It just helps you get not too dark too fast. And then follow up with a 4B, 6B, 8B, some of those darker pencils. You'll also see me use an old vinyl eraser. I was going crazy when I was drawing this because what I really wanted was my kneaded eraser. But I have 3 children that live with me in my house, and I love them dearly, but they use my art studio as their own art studio sometimes, and my kneaded erasers have a tendency to disappear. So let me talk about when you use a vinyl eraser versus when you should use a kneaded eraser. Vinyl erasers, like this Faber-Castell one, are great for using removing large areas of marks and removing it completely. The problem with a vinyl eraser is when I get to an area like this, let's say I got too dark here and I want to lighten it up. When I go to erase this, it's going to smudge my graphite around. I either leave all the graphite, or with a vinyl, I'm going to remove it all, or I'm just going to create a smudgy, yucky mess, which is what happened with my drawing yesterday when I was working on it. I needed to go into school and get my better vinyl eraser that I keep there and use that to help, and I brought back my kneaded eraser. Kneaded erasers are used to kind of pluck value up. So you don't rub with a kneaded eraser, you dab. So I got darker than I wanted to in this area of my shoe. And if I want to lighten it up, do you see how quickly that kneaded eraser took that value down? It also makes very satisfying kind of noise. So if I want to lighten up value, I don't want to make a smudge, I can use that kneaded eraser and that will go in and it will lighten up my value pretty slick, right? It's a nice way to just pull out a little bit of value, not lose all of the information that you've built up. So if you get an area that you're like, yikes, a little too far, too fast there, you just come back in with this and you can lighten it up a little bit. And then you can draw back in on top of it. So pretty neat little tool. To clean the kneaded eraser, you kind of pull it apart, put it back together, pop it into a little ball. And I think just watching me do that, you understand why my children steal these. They use them as their putty. A third tool that's really handy, and I don't have these in my students' art kits, and perhaps I should start getting them, are these Papermate Tough Sticks. It's an eraser stick. It works kind of like a mechanical pencil. You just push out more eraser this way, and then it comes with, erasers that you can put back in. This is a vinyl eraser, but it's in a stick format, so you can get into really small areas to remove information if you're like, yikes, really wanted to get rid of this, but I know if I go in with my vinyl eraser right here, I'll probably end up smudging stuff I don't want to smudge. So that's a really handy tool to get someday if you want to add a neat little tool to your artist arsenal. One more thing that I forgot to mention, you are going to see me repeatedly do something that you really shouldn't do, and that is go like this with my hand to wipe the eraser bits off of my drawing. Every time I do this, I smudge my graphite and I get dirty paper. And I want you guys to try to avoid to do that. So if I erase and I get a lot of eraser marks, the first thing you should do to try to get them off is tap them off your page. If they don't tap off, you can try to pick them up with the eraser itself. The other thing that you can do, if you get little eraser marks on there, they don't tap off, the eraser doesn't want to pick them up, I go just right where the eraser is and I loosen them up a little with my finger, and then they usually tap off the page. But, you know, be better than me. Don't dirty up your drawing. It took a lot of work to get the page clean again, so keep that in mind. So get out your graphite pencils, get a variety of different values of them. At this point, I'm going to go back to the beginning of where I started line quality on this, and you can watch me build the line quality and the details as I go through the shoe. The first thing you're going to see me do is go in and lighten up my lines where I'm going to draw. My eraser was dirty, so I cleaned it on a blank piece of paper. I'm lightening up the lines so that I can go in and draw the lines exactly where I want it, in the texture I want, and the lightness or darkness that I'd like it to be. I'm starting on the right side of the shoe, and really I should be starting on the left side of the shoe. I was just kind of excited to draw the back of it, honestly. But as a righty, makes a lot more sense for me to work from left to right, and that way I'm not dragging my hand through my finished work. So I'm just going in using my broken line and kind of laying out the basic structures of the piece. I am using my HB pencil here. If you have a 2H, that's what I would recommend to start. So until I get the lines where I want them and how I want them, I'm drawing them on the lighter side. Now you can see me going in and darkening things up, adding a little bit more detail and things like that. I use pencil pressure on the back of the shoe to make a nice smooth line that has some line variation within it. Thinking about doing things like a double line on areas where you can see the thickness or the side of a piece. And I'll just keep going in and kind of working through the shoe, getting darker and lighter in areas that dip behind things. I tend to get darker where curves curve inward, and I tend to get lighter where curves curve out. It just kind of accentuates that curve structure. I am also using a darker line on the bottom of the shoe and on major areas of detail. In the stitching you saw me do there, I tried to keep that area a little bit lighter. I don't want that to pop out, so I'm also using darker lines where I want things to pop out. And I use darker lines on the front edge of the shoe than the back edge overall to make the shoe look like it's coming forward. Take your time, try your best. I'm not a perfect drawer, and you probably saw that when I built the shoe, the basic form. There's some people that can sit down with a pencil, draw the thing exactly as it is in front of them, and they're good to go. I've got to work to get the right shapes, and that's okay if you have to too. We all draw differently, and we all come at this with different abilities and different experiences. I just want you to give it your best shot and see what you can do. If you drew the same shoe 100 times, you could draw it all in one sitting pretty darn well, and you would also hate drawing the shoe probably by then. So just give it your best shot, see what you can do, and really play with that line quality. You'll see me as I work through these straps, which are more complicated, use my eraser a ton. It's okay. It's better not to, obviously, because it can make a mess of your paper and it can make a mess of your lines. But if you need to do it, you need to do it. I also struggled a lot with the toe of my shoe. I probably redrew it 3 times, and I just redrew it now, even though I was done with all my video footage. I'm going to redo my little end part here now that I finally got the shoe tip in a space where I'm like, yes, it works. So no shame in not being perfect, my friends. We're all here to learn. We're all here to get better. And you should have some fun doing this. You should be proud of parts of the piece, and it's okay if there's other parts that you're not proud of. It's all part of the process. When you're doing little details, take it slower, really study your shoe, and be thoughtful about it. So trying to get the right angles on these straps was a little tricky, and right there on the tip of that strap is where you can see my eraser got a little smudgy and was leaving some darkness on the page that I didn't like. So I stopped drawing that little part for a little bit and decided I'd come back to it later. It's okay if you need to take a break from a spot for a while. Come back to it when you're ready for it. As I grew frustrated, I started to push harder with my pencil. That's a pretty common thing to do as well. You're frustrated, you tense up, you're going to push harder. Because I was pushing harder with the pencil, I wasn't able to leave the middle of the straps quite as light as I wanted to, so I had to go in and lighten that up a little bit. And then in here, like I said in the beginning of the video, I got a little darker on that back edge than I wanted to. But thank goodness I found my kneaded eraser. I could go in and lighten it up and make it work better. Another thing that's helpful sometimes is to turn your page. So by turning that page, I was able to keep my hand at a more comfortable angle to draw that line on the bottom of the shoe. It's more comfortable to draw a vertical line for me than a horizontal line. So don't feel bad if you got to turn your page so you can draw things in a way that's more comfortable. At this point, all I'm doing is adding little details and playing with that line in the bottom of the shoe. Take your time, have some fun with it, and see how many details you can spot and spy and add to your shoe. It's really what makes a piece a lot more fun, and it's a lot more fun to look at a piece that has a ton of little details that you notice over time. The finished shoe drawing. I finished the toe in a way that I'm much happier with down here. It was looking way too rounded. But I'm really happy with the finished shoe. I love the texture on the back of the shoe. That's probably my favorite part. I'm pretty happy with the straps as well. And overall, I think I did a pretty good job. So I'm gonna be proud of myself, and it's good to celebrate yourself. I want you to be proud of this too. Even if in the end you're like, the shoe's not great, you know what? You did something that's kind of hard. You should feel really good about it. Make sure you sign your drawing. Every time I forget to sign any of my art, my mom yells at me. So make sure you sign yours so no one yells at you like your art mom or your actual mom. Celebrate, have some fun. I hope you really enjoyed taking on this big challenge with me, playing with some line quality, playing with some line texture and line weight, and really pushing yourself to try something that isn't too simple. I'm proud of you for trying as hard as you tried. I'm proud of you for the time that you put in, and I'm proud of you for the growth that you've shown. Well done, my friends.